Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm your host, Chris Berg. The mission of our show here is really to empower you to build generational wealth with real estate. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today. We're going to be talking about just the massive housing crisis taking place in LA. I think what's fascinating, I'm going to share with you some just staggering stats in a moment. But what's interesting, according to polling, is that the number one reason people are leaving California and or LA is just simple affordability. They just cannot afford to live here. So how do we solve this crisis? Special guest with us today, staggering number here. Speaking of staggering stats, so number $4 billion in development within the Americas, within the US, Mexico, and Costa Rica. Also, some very prominent residential projects up in San Francisco, and the Ritz-Carlton at LA Live in downtown LA. Our LA expert, Hana Cha. You can find out more at thehanacollective.com. Hana, it's great to have you with us, and thanks so much.
Chris, thanks so much for having me.
So I want to really dive into this crisis and talk about some solutions. Before we do, just so people can get an idea of your expertise within LA and real estate, share with us a little bit of your background.
I started my career working in, real estate development in the residential side, and then over the years transitioned a bit into mixed use, condo, hotel, essentially any development project with some sort of residential component in it that is, more than one house, I guess is the best way to describe it. But I've been a part of different development projects at various stages from, beginning to final unit sold. And so over the last 16 years, I've been through the ups and downs and, the best of the highs and the worst of the lows.
Quickly, how did you end up in development?
It was happenstance. It was a very unplanned kind of, all of the stars aligned. I met somebody. My first, real estate job opportunity was to work for a developer at the very bottom of the food chain. And at the time when I was 23, it seemed like a really fun and interesting opportunity to get into a business I knew nothing about. And it just all kind of went from there. So, there was no set path of sort. I went with the flow and, I put my head down and did everything I could to move up.
Well, good for you. I know you've done extremely well. And so I want to just dive into this LA housing crisis. I mean, there's so much coming into LA over the next few years with the World Cup in 26, Super Bowl in 27, Olympics in 28. And I know that's more transient population, but still going to be a lot of eyeballs on our community. And I want to share this stat with you as we dive into this conversation. So this is a recent study done by Freddie Mac. It says LA is short 400,000 homes with over 75,000 homeless people within the county. Recently, Mayor Karen Bass said those people are going to be housed by the Olympics, so we'll see. But it's actually a rise of homelessness of 10%. And this is what was really interesting to me. The city also leads the nation in overcrowding, with 11% of homes having more than one person per room, and with many living in garages and attics. So if you were queen for the day, or maybe for a few years, how would you go about solving this problem?
Oh my gosh. I think that the easiest way to nothing is easy in real estate, but my brain says we need to take advantage of, adaptive reuse opportunities. And especially given what's happened, post-pandemic and a lot of the offices now being, more vacant than ever. I think it's, as of this Q2 this year, more than 30% of office spaces in LA are vacant, right? So it's kind of taking adaptive reuse opportunities to convert these office spaces into residential buildings to accommodate for some, of the housing needs we have here in the city.
How would you go about doing that? And I think you bring up a good point. I want to share with our audience. There was a recent forum actually in regards to some of the housing, opportunities that are available from taking the office to resi. But a lot of developers are like, you're going to have to, it says here, you're going to have to beg people to buy some of these buildings. It just doesn't work. So based on what you're seeing being put out by the city, what's not working and what would you do differently?
Look, I think that there was a white paper that was published a couple of a few years ago by Gilmore and Associates. Gilmore and Associates was a big part of really gentrifying downtown LA and kind of being the pioneer of taking downtown LA to where it was just before the pandemic. And, they estimated that converting 5 to 10% of LA's 155 million square feet of office space could generate 15 to 16,000 new housing units. And, I think that number alone is a huge opportunity. However, I guess local policy and regulation, I mean, it's not easy to do these things. Like you would think that because of the infrastructure is already existing, right? Like it would be much easier to try to convert to residential units. But, between design and planning, entitlements, plan check, permitting, it average 4 to 6 years to do a conversion, which, you would think you build something ground up, it's 4 to 6 years. So it kind of takes the same amount of time, right? And, we talk about affordable housing. Realistically, the cost for affordable housing is, in LA on average, 750,000 a door. And so if you look at, what kind of developer, who is going to actually take on this sort of endeavor, because the incentives, whether they are tax incentives or otherwise incentives, it's just not enough, right? So, I mean, what would I do differently? I think this is an interesting question because, I thought about this a lot coming up to this conversation. And it's like, I think to have a successful real estate platform in any community, you have to not only understand the community and the politics and the city and the people within it, but you also have to understand business, right? And so we look at who our local policymakers are. We look at who our government officials are. And sure, we can say they understand the community, they understand the politics, but most of them don't understand the business or the economics of real estate. And I think that's where the disconnect is, because it's so much more than putting these initiatives out there and wanting to do these great things, because if you actually don't understand the business deal, it's hard to tie all of those pieces together.
Very well said, which I think a lot of people were surprised that Karen Bass won last election, right? I mean, she's going against this huge developer. Based on the people I've talked to, they just sort of poo-poo the ULA measure, thinking, that's not going to pass. And sure enough, it did. That's another sort of thorn in the side right now in LA. And were you surprised by the election results or not really?
I was surprised. I was surprised. And, I don't consider myself a political person, and I don't follow politics like, maybe like I should, but I follow just enough. And I was very surprised. And that did catch my attention more, really, to try to understand, like, why, right? And I think Mayor Bass has really great ideas. And, I hear a lot of great things, like she is a doer, she's a go-getter. But, if you look at the economics of the business deal, right? Like, I don't know how this works. I don't know how this is supposed to be actually executed.
Well, in saying that too, when you talk about the office to residential conversions, it's challenging. I mean, you've got typically, one bathroom on one part of the floor, so the plumbing's an issue. You've got all these windows. I mean, it can be unless you're talking maybe student housing where they're more used to just having, one bathroom, one shower in one area.
Right. Right. No, and I think that's a big part of, design and planning, because with existing structures, there's a whole process with the city that you have to go through architectural design. Depending on where it is in the city, you have to go through historic preservation, and then you have to kind of put this plan together and submit to the city and essentially have a public hearing about it, right? And the people that come to the public hearings, like, they're not real estate people either. So it's a hard situation to do anything in a timely manner and, in my opinion, make an impactful difference.
So that being said, it sounds like it's just so arduous that many people just sort of throw their hands up in the air and say, I'm done. And then you put some of this rent control on top of it, then it definitely doesn't pencil. So streamline some things. I mean, you want to make sure things are done well and done safely and effectively. At the same point in time, there's got to be some ways to streamline it to improve efficiencies, no?
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of my point. I think that the people that are involved in, creating policy and creating processes to get this done, I think there needs to be more real estate people in it. And I'm not just talking about, um, you know, financial mechanics of real estate, but I'm talking about people like Rick Caruso who've actually done these kind of projects and understand it from beginning to end and knows what it takes, right? And so I think when you have somebody like him involved in local policy and regulation, like that gives us an opportunity to, I think, make some kind of headway.
I mean, I have no idea if Mr. Caruso would be open to this, but I think it would have been a brilliant chess move on Mayor Bass's part to actually maybe put together like a real estate committee and how to solve this housing crisis and go out to Mr. Caruso and go, hey, why don't you be the chair of this? You know, we won, but we appreciate your impact in LA. Like I think that would have been a great
100%. No, look, I mean, Mayor Bass put out the housing element rezoning program in 2022, right? Which it calls for expedited or accelerated, new home construction and trying to accommodate our needs. And it's like, why didn't he tap Rick Caruso to be a part of this program? Why didn't she tap more people like him? Maybe it's not him, to be a part of really kind of taking lead on a charge like this.
I think it could have been a brilliant political and chess move, if you will. So let's touch on the ADUs. I mean, is that, I don't think that's a solution. It's a step in the right direction, but what's your take on the ADUs?
Look, I think it's too small, right, to really accommodate what we need. You mentioned at the beginning of the show, we need 500,000 new homes. As of second quarter of this year, I pulled up some stats. I think it's like we currently have 57,000 housing units in various stages of construction across LA, right? And like we need 500,000. And also, like of that 500,000, 185,000 of those need to be affordable housing, right? And so to give context, like between 2010 and 2019, just over 83,000 new homes were created in LA. So, we're in 2024, right? Like we need 500,000 by 2029. Like how?
Wow.
How does that work?
I mean, there's one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I'm not saying this is the solution, but I want to get your take because you spent more time in LA than I have as of late. Is as I drive around, it always intrigues me that we didn't build up, and I don't mean like Manhattan, but in some essence of Manhattan. So
Mhm.
why hasn't LA talked more about, hey, let's build up, and it's going to make the city much more centralized? I mean, obviously they've done that in downtown, but again, is downtown where people want to go right now? I don't know.
Yeah. Look, I think I've asked that question since the first day I stepped foot in the city in 2005. I think LA is such a weird metropolitan city, and it's considered one of the global metropolitan cities of the world. And we have zero vertical living here. I mean, maybe not zero, but very, very little of it. Yeah, compared to the context of the rest of the world, right? I think it's a combination of, zoning regulation and public opposition, local residents, and if you go into outside of downtown LA, whether it's, call it West Hollywood, whether it's, Silver Lake, whether it's, I don't know, Ventura even, think about it. Like the local residents there, nobody wants to have big buildings coming up all over their city. For their own convenience, for their own, I guess, protection of, their life and their lifestyles, whatever that is. But it's weird because we're now at a place where we really need to be focused on more vertical living. But I think that our greatest opposition right now is local residents, and then two, rezoning.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, have you done much with rezoning? And if so, what's the process been? Because we talk about it internally with our firm, and we just kind of go, boy, that you know.
Look, I've been a part of few rezoning, I guess, initiatives or engagements with clients, and It's not easy, and I can take an example. I have a client now who has an apartment building who is looking at doing a condo conversion, right? Which technically and theoretically, it's just paperwork because you need to condo map the property. But it changes from, multifamily rental to for sale condo. And it's really a term on a piece of paper, right? And maybe transference of grant deed on individual units. But even that process is, not simple. It's not only so much paperwork, but you have to have a public hearing for that. And even then, waiting for the review and approval process. Look, they say it's anywhere from 6 to 9 months, but realistically, it's like 16 to 18 months right now.
And I'm curious, like when you talk to developers, what are you hearing from them? And I want to throw in sort of caveat in there from a standpoint where I mentioned rent control a moment ago. Also, you put on top of it, like I think there's going to be some housing for homeless people in Santa Monica that ended up being $1 million a door. Like I can't even fathom that. So what are developers saying to you? And are you just seeing capital flee from this town or no?
Yeah, well, look, developers don't want to build here. We have very, very minimal brand new ground up construction happening, right? It's especially for unless you're building uber luxury for the top, call it 2 to 5% of the residents in the city. Like it's impossible. I think take City View, for example. City View is the largest LA multifamily developer for the last, call it 12 to 15 years or something. And I think they have 2 or 3 active projects in LA now. So it's like they've expanded outside of California. They're looking at projects in Colorado and, other parts of the country. But developers are fleeing. And, shame on us for kind of getting to this place when we need them the most.
You shared with me yesterday, because we had like a pre-interview conversation, a staggering stat, and I may not get this right, but I think you said it was City View that they underwrote was 180 deals last year and did 4, something to that effect.
Yeah, they underwrote. So they did the CEO, Sean Burton, who I think is an amazing, inspirational, real estate guy. The Real Deal did a profile on him, and he said in his interview, they underwrote 183 deals and ended up doing 4. So you can imagine, right? And City View, they're not like luxury developers. They are very much market rate infill, and they've been creating housing for the middle income class and the average resident here for over a decade. And so when you hear things like that from a prominent developer like City View, it really does make you question, like, wow, if they can't do it, who actually is?
It's such a great point. And I will share with you this, though, because I want to get your take on it. So as I was coming back out to California to do our developments, people, like I was at an event in Las Vegas on my way here. People literally laughed at me for telling them I was coming back into California. Like, are you crazy? But our JV partner is a billionaire hotel developer. And he's like, guys, that's exactly why we want to be there. It's so tough to build there that when you actually get an asset built in California, it is a gem. So there's 2 sides of the coin. Just would love your take on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I again, if that gem is the fancy trophy for the upper echelon of the market, right? And we can look at projects like that we have now in the city. Rosewood and Beverly Hills, same thing. They call it top 5% of the market. The new Amman residences adjacent to Waldorf Astoria, again, top 1% of the market. So it's like if you're building luxury for that, then yeah, of course it can be the gem and call it your trophy. But we're not building 500 million of those to accommodate our housing issue. I hate using the word crisis, But yeah, our housing issue.
Okay, housing challenge. That's fair. But you bring up a good point. I mean, so for example, the doorman at Rosewood, where does he live? I mean, so those are
Yeah.
some of the challenges I want you to talk about. Like, hey, it's great if you can go build a Rosewood or some of these really, really nice, developments for the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. But then you also got to have service people around that are going to work in these different communities. What do they do?
Well, I mean, I think that's why we have a lack of local businesses, and I think it's a big part of why so many of the local small businesses have closed over the last several years, right? I think what we forget when we talk about real estate, that real estate is indirectly connected to everything that creates our economy, right? Without the small businesses, without the homes, we don't have laborers or anybody that's able to live close enough to be able to actually go to work. When small businesses can't find people to work, or they don't have customers coming in because there's nobody around, like they're forced to shut down. When they leave, more vacancies arise. Like, what do you do with storefronts, right? Like, we can't convert storefronts on a main road into homes. I mean, maybe you can, like, maybe that becomes a completely different kind of adaptive reuse, but it's all indirectly connected. And I think, we've been short-sighted in I guess, long-term planning, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not a politician, so I hate to say I know better, but all I can say is this process, and it doesn't matter how you slice and dice it, it's not an easy situation. And I think Mayor Bass's initiatives are really great, but I'm really curious to understand exactly how she's going to execute, right? And I think that's a big part of the conversation. Like, we have all of these programs, these initiatives, these incentives, blah, blah, blah. But like, what is the actual path of execution, right?
I agree. I mean, it's one thing to set the vision. You and I talked about this as well, where she said, hey, the upcoming Olympics in 2028, no cars, all the homeless people are going to be housed. And it sounds cool, but you're like, have you ever driven in LA? Like, it's all cars. How are we going to do it
Right.
Olympics, right? Quickly, then I do want to move on a little bit about some of these upcoming events. And a recent comment from Mayor Bass is you're starting to see some LA office transactions take place. The Aon building, I think it was the 801 Tower. But then there's another friend of mine that was the creator of CMBS. I mean, very well versed in real estate. He's like, Chris, I wouldn't touch downtown LA for $1.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on downtown LA? You long downtown LA, especially knowing that you got the World Cup, Super Bowl, Olympics coming, or would you stay away?
Well, I think it depends on what your ultimate, end use objectives are. With some of these office transactions, look, I do think that people are starting to go back into the office. I don't know if that really makes a dent at all, but I do believe that there are other ways to use office space outside of just residential units. And so, depending on the developer, look, with 801 Tower, what are they going to do? I don't know. They're an interesting group, right? So no idea what they actually plan on doing. Like, maybe they will attempt some sort of office to resi conversion, which would be great. I think, when we talk about the Olympics and Mayor Bass doing all of these things, to create, I think it's great for the city, and it's great for, I guess, local governance, because it does put more pressure on them to somehow, accelerate our housing program. But at the same time, we're expecting what, 1.5 million visitors into the city during that 2-week period. For the people that are interested in buying these buildings downtown to create more, what do you call, transient, housing opportunities for them, great. But then, like, what happens after the Olympics?
Exactly.
Like, I'm so curious about like what kind of the long-term like legacy play is, because we're trying to duct tape the situation to accommodate the short-term needs, right? But what happens afterwards? Does that mean that we then are completely saturated with inventory on the market? So then excuse me. Does that mean we get saturated with inventory so that affects, current home prices? Which inevitably, does that mean that home prices decrease? Like, how does that work? And even with like the affordable housing needs and accommodating homelessness, I feel like there's so many more variables to consider a long-term solution.
You've mentioned the Olympics a couple times, as have I. I do want to talk a little bit more about downtown in a minute, but I want to play this clip since you brought it up from Mayor Bass. This is her State of the City a few months ago, but I want to share this clip with you and our audience just to give people, like if you've ever spent time in LA, you already know how congested it is here. And then when she gives this analogy of the Olympics coming to LA, it's, to me, staggering to think about. So we'll play this and get your reaction.
The games in Paris, because in just 4 short years, we will host the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games right here. Millions of people, just think about this, millions of people from more than 200 countries speaking hundreds of languages will come for one of the largest gatherings in the world. So imagine this. It will be like hosting 7 Super Bowls a day for 17 straight days. Can you imagine that? That's a little overwhelming to think about. And we can't forget the
7 Super Bowls a day. I mean, that is just, it's staggering. What say you?
I mean, I think that sounds like a nightmare. So I feel like make a note to, not be in the city during those 17 days. Like, Jesus. Look, I think that there's both sides to this conversation, because it can be great for LA. And it does put a global spotlight on us, and it can, that it can be a very positive spotlight. But on the flip side of that, I mean, it can be a complete shit show, right? And it could make the city of LA just a complete joke, right? So I think that there's both sides of it. And look, I think being the mayor of the city, you have to be optimistic and positive and be a little bit more hoorah, for sure. But Mayor Bass, how are we going to accommodate, millions of people to host 7 Super Bowls for 17 days? Please let me know. I'm very curious.
Well, I appreciate, how you're going about this, because I think it's fascinating where you and I talked before this. You look, Chris, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, and yet there's just some real conversations you have to have. And so the no car piece, and she's suggesting, hey, we're going to go to public transit. There's a ton of money to go to public transit over the next few years. The challenge is I haven't ridden public transit in LA, so I can't speak from personal experience. All I know is that when I see the news, it sounds like there's a lot of muggings, violence. So I don't know if that's a fair assessment, but if it is, are they going to have the spine to, from a DA perspective, a mayor, to uplift, if you will, the police force or security? I don't know, but what say you on that?
Look, there's estimated $13 billion budget in the 2023-2024 year for public transportation in the city. Actually, because you brought it up in our conversation yesterday, I was curious. There was a study done in 2020 that said only 10% of LA residents use public transit. And local residents have serious concerns and may consider utilizing more public transit if, they could reduce travel time, increase frequency of service, ensure safety and cleanliness. And, again, like when I was working on the Ritz-Carlton, actually, it was, is it the blue line or the green line? But one of the new metro lines was put in during that time. And so I got on the 7th and Flower Street stop, and I took it just up to the historic core. I don't know, maybe it was 6 stops to literally get across downtown. just because I wanted to experience it. And if it was anything like that, like there's just no way, there's no way that. And I think that LA is unique in that we are, what is it, 500 million square miles? Like the city is sprawled out so much, right? So I don't know if you live in, let's say you do work downtown, but because you can't afford to live downtown, like, you live in Hawthorne or Gardenia or somewhere that's like not close. Like, what does that commute look like? And I think for those people that even if public transportation is available, I think people that have cars and can afford to keep cars will continue to use their car because, getting across town takes an hour in your car. I can't imagine that public transportation will get you there faster. Maybe you can if you are jumping off one stop and getting on another bus and, kind of doing all of that, but like nobody wants to deal with that. Right. And I think that where there is an opportunity for public transportation is for new residents that are moving into the city. Not very many are because everybody's leaving, but new residents that come into the city that are not familiar with the existing public transportation system, younger people that, come from, call it New York or San Francisco or Chicago, where they do have more viable public transit. Like they may be more optimistic and keen on utilizing it. But I think for local Angelenos who have been here most of their adult life, like, yeah, no chance. No chance.
Now, just to play the other side here, because you and I've had this conversation as well, and to be fair to Mayor Bass, have you ever seen the movie Minority Report?
I have.
Remember when they're bouncing it out of the cars and what, like, so I think at some point with, Tesla and the non-driving or whatever, you don't have to, hands-free driving, like maybe they're thinking, hey, by 2028, you can take public transit, bounce into a car that you just rent for a short amount of time. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to be the benefit of the doubt here, but is that part of the vision, you think, where they see this Minority Report taking place where you're in a car for a couple hours, you rent it, someone else uses it? I mean, because we know that's coming.
Yeah. Look, I think there's already a bit of that happening, right? Is it the mass majority? No. But again, like if you can afford to do that, I will, because it's like I kind of look at that as an Uber competition, right? Why go through the hassle of like renting a car, getting to it, figuring out how I'm going to manage it if I can just call an Uber and it'll probably cost me the same or less.
Well, you know what? You bring up a great point because Ubers pretty soon are not going to have drivers anyway. So maybe that's a prime example. Say I just Uber my car, I get a ride, and I'm bouncing around from place to place. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see how tech shifts some of the transportation that's taking place today. So anything else you want to add or share about LA or where you potentially see some opportunity?
Look, I think if anybody in this business is watching this and has an affinity for real estate development, I think that we all need to somehow get together and create call it off politics committee to try to better enforce and support what we have available to really, make a difference in our current housing challenges.
I also want to give you a chance because I was going to be respectful of your time and keep these around, 30 minutes or so. And so give you a chance. You're going to be speaking at an event in LA coming up. So maybe that's a great opportunity for us to have go up and have this conversation with people and say, hey, let's put together our own committee and get some stuff done. So I think that's September 12th. It's the real deal. Yeah. So what are you going to be sharing here?
So the LA Forum, the Real Deal, hosts this every year. It's one of the, I guess, bigger local. Oh, I'm sorry. That's my dog. It's one of the bigger local real estate events. There is a focus this year on mixed use development projects and how we're, I guess, positioning that in the city. So I think it would be a great opportunity. Again, I apologize for my dog. He just came out of nowhere.
What's her name?
This is Riley.
She's like,
I would love to meet new people. And again, we can put more information in the show notes. But if you want to join, use the promo code Thanks Hana at checkout, and you'll get 20% off.
That's awesome. All right, and then also you're gonna, You had a great life. You're going to be speaking in LA, and then you're going to be speaking in Miami in December.
Yeah, so in Miami, so Elevate is actually the largest, it's builder and developer focused event of the year. And they, this event attracts developers and designers. And, I guess there's a handful of real estate agents that come and join too, but it's a big part of the behind the scenes world that I don't think we get to experience out in the forefront as much. And so that event is taking place December 9th through the 11th. And I think, you can register now, but I'll be sharing more of that information, that event information and their agenda and different things happening there on my social and website in the coming months as well.
Perfect. And then last but not least, the Hana Collective. If people like what's happening here, people want to work with you, just go to the website, reach out and connect, or
or you can depending on if you are a developer or a real estate agent and you're interested in getting into this space, or if you are an industry partner of any sort. I've always loved connecting. I think a big part of how I operate and what I believe we're missing in this business is this collective network of experienced industry experts that care about what they're doing and utilizing each of our skill sets to really deliver the best of the thing that we specialize in. So reach out to me for anything, website, social, LinkedIn.
Hana, thank you for the time. I appreciate it. Outstanding content and just great conversation. And I'll give you 30, 60 seconds for the last word.
No, I really enjoyed this conversation. Look, I think that this is the local housing issue or local housing challenges is something that anybody in this business should really be thinking about. And not that I think that, we'll come up with the easiest solution, but I definitely think that the more people that know about this business that get involved, we have a better chance of moving the needle.
Yeah, I love your idea of kind of the crowd think, and hey, let's come together and create some solutions. So thanks for joining us here on the Commercial Real Estate Report. Please share with colleagues, family, friends. And as I said earlier, the mission of the show is to help empower you to build generational wealth with real estate.